Hi, it's Peter Schiff. It is Thursday, January 14th, 2010. Well, I want to talk a little bit today about the idiocy of government programs. As if we didn't have enough evidence of this already, we got a lot more of it today. First, let's talk about the compromise on the plan to tax health insurance. First of all, the plan is unconstitutional because what the government is doing is they're exempting certain classes of individuals from the tax, at least for a period of time. And these individuals include state and municipal employees, as well as people who have earned their health benefits through collective bargaining contracts, meaning union members. So obviously this isn't fair. It violates the uniformity provisions as well as the equal protection provisions of the Constitution. But no one really cares about that because the whole health care bill is unconstitutional anyway. So let's put all that aside and just focus on the sheer economics of the plan. Now, the reason that they want to tax these Cadillac health insurance plans, these are the plans that are very expensive and that provide very comprehensive coverage where you have a very low deductible, a very low copay, and the Obama administration wants to discourage the use of those plans by increasing their cost by taxing the insurance companies. Well, maybe it never dawned on President Obama or Congress, why is it that so many people are utilizing these expensive plans right now? Well, it's because of a government subsidy. The government subsidizes these high-cost plans by allowing employers to give them to their employees tax-free. That's what increases their appeal, that makes them less expensive, and that's the reason that so many people are using them. So now we have the government trying to impose a tax to undo the damage done by a subsidy. You figure they would just remove the subsidy and call it a day. But they can't figure this out. And it's actually an admission that the reason that health care is so expensive is because of this government subsidy. Now, I have a very simple way around this problem that would be very acceptable politically, and I think this is what we should do. I think that the government should allow individual employees to opt out of employer-provided health insurance. And so if your employer is giving you a $20,000 insurance package for your family per year that you get tax-free, you should be able to opt out of that, and instead your employer should be allowed to pay you that $20,000 tax-free. So instead of your employer giving that money to an insurance company, they give it to the employee. Now the employee has $20,000 of tax-free money, and he can go out and buy a less expensive insurance plan that has higher deductibles and higher copays, and he'll have plenty of money to afford it because he'll have all that extra income that he's now earning that isn't being given to the insurance companies. And that's a tax cut that doesn't cost the government a penny because the money doesn't come out of the government's pocket, it comes out of the insurance company's pocket. But anyway, that makes too much sense for our elected officials to ever pursue it. Now, let's move on to another tax that they proposed today, and this is on the financial services industry. They proposed a tax on major financial entities, the investment banks, presumably to try to recoup some of the costs of the bailouts, which they never should have done in the first place. So if they hadn't bailed these companies out, there would be nothing to recoup. But they want to levy a tax equal to 15 basis points on their liabilities, on the amount of money that they've borrowed. And the idea is twofold. One, it's the companies that are borrowing all this money, that are heavily leveraged, that are more likely to fail again and might need a bailout, so we're going to collect some money. Plus, the government wants to discourage banks from borrowing this much money, and by putting a tax on the amount of money they borrow, theoretically, it will act as a deterrent to borrowing. Now, wait a minute. You're talking about a 15 basis point tax. That's the equivalent of 15 basis points more in interest rates, because paying a tax on what you owe is the same thing as paying interest on what you owe. Well, these banks are getting their money for free from the Federal Reserve right now. You know, if the Federal Reserve raised interest rates by 1%, that would cost these major banks 6 times as much as this tax. And that's just 1%. You know, if the government is worried about investment banks being overly leveraged, why has the Federal Reserve got interest rates at 0? That's the reason that they're so leveraged. If a small 15 basis points tax would discourage excess speculation, how about if the Fed just raised interest rates? Why don't we get interest rates back up to 3 or 4 or 5%? That would really rein it in. You think Goldman Sachs cares about 15 basis point tax? They couldn't care less. They're paying zero on the money they're borrowing as it is. This is a sweetheart deal. As long as the Federal Reserve keep interest rates so low, what do they care about this 15 basis point tax? But again, it's a perfect example about the government trying to undo a problem that the government created. The reason these companies have so much debt is because the Fed made borrowing money so cheap. This tax is barely going to offset that. You know, of course, I can't help but comment on the hearings now underway in Washington, presumably to try to figure out why we had a financial crisis. Now, of course, I say presumably because Congress doesn't really want to know why there's a financial crisis. If they did, they would have called me to testify. After all, I sent them letters, I called them, I tried to get them to let me testify. I mean, after all, I did predict a financial crisis. It stands to reason that I know what caused it. After all, I was able to predict it. What's the point in asking all the people that said it was impossible, all the people who were blindsided by the financial crisis? Why ask them? I mean, they obviously don't know. But of course, you know, if you look at these hearings, the one thing that everybody seems to agree on is the problem started with too much leverage, that Wall Street simply borrowed too much money. Well, why? Doesn't it dawn on anybody in Congress that the reason they borrowed so much money was because the Fed made it so cheap? If it wasn't so cheap to borrow, they wouldn't have borrowed so much. You know, they basically, the Fed took all the cost out of speculating. And of course, the other reasons that they borrowed so much money was because the government made it easy by guaranteeing a lot of the debt. And of course, you had the Greenspan put, you had the idea that even if they did borrow a lot of money and there was a problem for the economy or for the banks, everybody knew that the Fed had their back. Everybody knew that Greenspan was going to ride to the rescue and bail everybody out with rate cuts. That was the moral hazard. That was the problem. I mean, we've had investment banks for a long time. We've had leverage for a long time. It only got out of hand in the last several years. Doesn't anybody want to know why? Do they think it's a coincidence that all this leverage just happened to coincide with 1% interest rates from the Federal Reserve? Do they think that's pure accident? Can't they put two and two together? If they're smart enough to realize that a 15 basis point tax on a debit balance will discourage some borrowing, why can't they see that lowering interest rates from 600 basis points down to 100 basis points, a 500 basis point tax, would have the opposite effect, would encourage speculation, would encourage rotation, would encourage all the leverage that was in the system? That's the problem. But of course, our leaders can't figure this out. Now, maybe some of them can. But again, these hearings, this is all smoke and mirror. This is all a show. They don't want to get to the bottom. They don't want the truth. And, you know, as Jack Nicholson said, they can't handle the truth. They're using these hearings as an excuse to increase regulation and the financial market, to increase the power of government. That's all they want. They want witnesses up there that will corroborate their idea that this crisis resulted from a lack of government oversight, a lack of regulation, and therefore the solution is to have more government oversight, more government regulation, and more power to protect the public and to protect the economy from the evils inherent in capitalism and in the free market. And that only with a big, powerful government protecting everybody can the market function. That's their agenda, and unfortunately, that's what they're going to get. The regulations we're getting today is just a small taste of what's to come. I'm worried. I hate to see the end result of this. There's a lot more regulation coming down the pipe on the financial service industry. This new tax is just the tip of the iceberg. Unfortunately, there's a lot more coming. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you understand this perspective and you can see the idiocy of these government policies where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing and they have one policy to counteract the bad effects of another policy without even understanding how the two interrelate and how government regulation and government subsidies caused the problem that they're now looking for a solution to. Anyway, that's it for today. Take care, everybody.